This is ModalModule, and you're listening to
Voltz Supreme Synth VGM Dream Stream Machine Podcast.
G'day, mate. Fellas and Sheilas, welcome back to another episode of Voltz Supreme Synth VGM Dream Stream Machine Podcast, the podcast that plays the synthiest video game music in all the universe, and the podcast that hosts the greatest guests in all the universe. Yes, that is right. From episode 1, we've literally had some of the craziest and most interesting guests from all around the universe on this show. And ladies and gentlemen, this episode is no exception. I've been planning to do this one for probably about a year, and we are finally here. Yes, as you already know, it is the ModalModule episode. Let's not waste any more time. Mr. ModalModule, welcome to Voltz Supreme's Synth VGM Dream Stream Machine podcast. It is a pleasure to have you join us here finally.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's also kind of crazy for somebody like me who's used to sitting in my little, hole in the wall of my room making music by myself.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to be able to share some of your music. I've been listening to this for probably over a year now. Since you released the Super Gear Quest soundtrack, I was very keen to do an episode on that, and it's taken us about a year to get here, but here we are, and I just can't wait to share some of your music, because I honestly think this is going to be in my personal opinion, people can judge for themselves, but I honestly think this is going to be some of the best music we've played on the podcast.
Wow, I will accept the concept of that, but I couldn't possibly internalize that for myself, because this is music that I made versus, so many phenomenal composers who have been doing it for so long and have, composed for incredibly, popular and prolific games, etc. And honestly, a lot of the music that you pick is some of my favorite music ever anyway. So, that's really saying something. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, every time I put together an episode, I'm hearing, sometimes I'm discovering new music for the episode. Sometimes I'm playing my favorite songs ever. And I'm always, putting together the playlist, as you'd call it, and listening over the songs and trying to figure out, what's the order going to be? Does this song fit in? Does that song fit in? And yeah, no joke, putting together a track list of my favorite ModalModule songs has been a lot of fun. And I've just found myself kind of listening it over quite a few times for no real reason except to just enjoy it. So yeah, I'm excited to share that. You've also chosen some of your all-time favorite music. Would you describe it as that?
Yeah, okay, so I wanted to clarify a little bit on my choices. I would say the first priority was music that, definitely has a nostalgic edge to it and, connects very much with me and my inspiration when it comes to music that I make. But also, I wanted to go a little bit outside of the crossroads between my favorite music and that which is really popular, because I feel like some, composers, some games really deserve shout-outs that just haven't gotten a whole lot of playtime on, let's say other VGM podcasts, or really just like anything, YouTube, favorites, whatever, lists and stuff like that. So I kind of tried to strike the balance between, things that were just plain good and everybody would agree, and things that maybe people hadn't really heard and they could kind of get turned on to.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to listening to all of your picks. Again, I'm really looking forward to sharing the ModalModule tracks that I've chosen I think I would really like to start with Super Gear Quest and just do a few songs from that. That is a incredibly large soundtrack. I think it's just over 3 hours, maybe. It's really good. I think it's pretty consistent all the way through, which is a pretty big thing to say for a 3-hour soundtrack. But yeah, I've definitely got some favorites from that I want to share. And I'd love to start us off with a really cool song called Grass Fields. And I think I'm going to say this about a lot of the songs, but what I really love about your music is the way your melodies, the notes and the rhythm are very important. They both come together really nicely, and I just love it when this song kicks into the B section, or the chorus you might call it. It gives me the happy vibes all over. So let's kick off with this one. This is Grass Fields from Super Gear Quest by ModalModule. Enjoy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Grass Fields, and no matter how many times I listen to that chorus section always puts a smile on my face. I just really love that. I love the sounds that you used. It's for me, it's a very heroic sounding song, and that was from the game Super Gear Quest, which was released early last year, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah. In fact, it's been I think it's been a little over a year if I'm correct. I looking back, just kind of thinking about how things were, I remember it was toward the beginning of last year. Maybe
you can tell us a bit about this game. From what I remember you saying, this was quite a lengthy project for you, and I imagine the developers of the game as well.
Yeah, so, first of all, there's literally only one other person involved in this game. His name is Felix Kjolner, and he was the solo dev for the game, including the music originally. So there's a little backstory there. I saw the game on Twitter. It was just a video clip of the game itself, and, there was music that went along with the gameplay. Gameplay looked absolutely phenomenal, like super, super cool. It's a side-scroller. It's kind of a Metroidvania, but a very sort of dark vibe to, just the artwork and the lighting, which was kind of what made it unique to me, because it's pixel art, but it has lighting, And so, long story short, I saw it and it looked amazing, but you know how on Twitter it just shows you the visual until you click, then you hear it? So I saw the visual, and then I clicked, and what I heard as far as the music no offense to him, because he is a developer, he is a pixel artist, he does a million different things, but the music itself was not up to the caliber of the rest of what was happening, what I was visually seeing. And so it was sort of, as a composer, it was sort of heartbreaking, because I really could see this game having a huge amount of potential, and I just felt like it was being weighed down by the music at that particular moment. So I did something that probably would be, considered a pretty dick move by a lot of standards, which I reached out to him and I said exactly what I just said, the idea that the caliber of the music just wasn't quite to the caliber of everything else, and that I offered myself to, sort of level, everything out, and really just to bring the whole thing to a better place, which, sounds pompous perhaps, but I've been making music for a very, very long time, and to my understanding, he really was just starting out with music. So part of it too is just the, level of experience. I was really just saying, okay, hey, your game looks awesome, let me help it to be even more awesome, and he was hesitant at first. He actually assigned me the task of making the final boss music right off the bat to see if I could make something good enough, in his opinion, to kind of, fit the bill. Anyway, long story short, that was how the relationship started, but it ended with us, being really, really close, and really active in each other's lives during the development of the game and everything like that. So it was, he would create, an area and then send me, the area, or send me the game with, that area built in so that I could play it, and then I would make the music for it. So it was a very active, very back and forth, sort of process that I really, really, really enjoyed. He's a great guy, and it is a fun game. To this day, I really enjoy playing the game. So, but yeah, that was a little lengthy. The bottom line is that's how I ended up joining the team of just the two of us, becoming a team as opposed to just the solo dev that he was. And yeah, from there, obviously we just kept going and going and going. And yeah, 58 tracks later, here we have the album for the resulting game, which is a very lengthy, game, all things considered. A lot of different areas, a lot of different, story developments and things that justified new music in my mind.
Yeah, no, that's great. I can really relate to that situation. I know when I was first starting off trying to get into video game composing, I was constantly approaching developers who were making their own games, and I was willing to just do everything for free just to get started in the beginning. And yeah, some of these guys, they just wanted to hold on to every little bit of the game, and when the game finally comes out, I check it out, and man, some of the music was so underwhelming, and I didn't realize that the composer was the developer. So I sent him a message thinking of one person in particular and said, hey, next time get me to do it. Like, what you've got here is actually not that great, and I'd love to give you something better for free. And he's like, I did the music myself.
Yeah.
So that was probably a bit worse than the way you approach it. I can imagine, any developer should really appreciate someone coming to them and saying, look, I really believe in your project and I want to add even more value to it.
Yeah, I would not have bothered at all if it wasn't for how really amazing the game looked right off the bat. And I want to say I did actually have the same experience, which is I didn't know who the composer was. I asked, in as sort of gracious and nonchalant way as I could. And then once I, sort of did my pitch or whatever, his initial response right off the bat was, well, I thought it was pretty good, talking about his own music, And again, this is the thing, I want to quickly cover that too, because I don't blame him, because you may be aware of this concept of, as an artist, as you develop, your perception changes, your perception also develops. And so what happens is, essentially, I'll look at, let's say, something I made, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something, and I'll think it doesn't sound that great, whereas at the time, I thought it was the most amazing thing I'd ever made, and that's just because we develop both our perception and our abilities as we go. So again, no blame to him at all, and actually, sorry, to touch back on Grassfields really quick, that B section that you're referring to is a callback to the main theme. That's actually the first track you hear in the game, and that main theme has just a teeny tiny little nugget of a theme that he had originally made. So I did my best to take his materials. He had, I want to say about 3 or 4 tracks that I gained inspiration from and actually utilized at least a little bit of, or whatever I felt was I guess, usable or inspiring in and of itself. Some actually quite a bit more than others. Nothing that you have on this playlist that I can see. Oh, actually, one of them might be. We'll talk about that when we get to it. I'll make sure that's actually one of them. But anyway, the point is that it wasn't all completely thrown away. You know what I mean? I utilized what I could. He didn't recognize the part of that I actually used, but it's there. It's like a 3-note nugget, but it's there.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Oh, we can talk more about that game as we go through a few more songs. But how about you bring us into your first pick that you've got for us?
Okay, great. So yeah, as I was saying, I sort of balanced it between popular and maybe less popular tracks. And what I did also, which I'm sure you noticed, is I went in chronological order, which, to me was a good way of just kind of feeling the chronology of my own life, although I actually realize now, just looking at the first choice, that came from a game that I didn't play before some of the other games. I probably played it a little bit later, but it was in fact created, earliest as far as my particular playlist. So this is from the original Metroid for NES by Hirokazu Hip Tanaka. The track itself is Kraid's Lair. It goes by a couple of different names, but basically, the area of Kraid. And it's just one of those things where it just has a very specific vibe that I really, really enjoy. And I feel like I end up utilizing a similar emotion in a lot of my music, whether intentionally or otherwise. It's just a specific, darker tone that I tend to gravitate towards.
Great.
So, yeah, let's do it. Kraid's Lair.
All right. Okay, so that was Kraid's Lair by Hirokazu Hip Tanaka for the game Metroid for the Nintendo Entertainment System. And yeah, it's, again, the vibe itself is something that I really like, but I want to give a particular note to the arpeggiation in the very last section right before the kind of blippy, delayed, I guess I'll call it a turnaround. So the very last section before that, just the way it flows upward in this really interesting way is definitely something that I feel like I gravitate toward in arpeggios, which I use all over the place, frankly. Moving lines, especially inside of, maybe a more prominent melody on top, something like that. But yeah, it's just a very specific way of doing it that I just have a lot of respect for. It's not just up and down. It's not just major triad. Or a minor triad. It's just a very unique and singular approach from what I interpret it as. Yeah, that definitely grabbed me as well when I listened to it. And I think one of the things I really like about this track and similar tracks, I guess you'd say, is you listen to it and there's a familiarity about it that you can instantly connect to, but at the same time it's got enough originality that kind of it's it's not predictable. It's kind of, it has these little interesting twists in there. So yeah, I won't say too much about it, but I did really enjoy that track. So
Yeah, for sure.
excellent suggestion.
Oh, thanks.
So let's bring us to your next track, the next ModalModule track that I've selected. Again, it's from Super Gear Quest. Now, this one, I believe it's pronounced Urudia, and from memory, I think there's 3 versions of this song, 3 or 4.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, 3.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
So this is probably the hardest decision I had to make, just picking which version to use, because every version has something about it that I like. And I ended up going with this one. This is the Dunes version. So again, another great song that I really love. The B section, the chorus, whatever you want to call it, it hits me every time. But we'll talk more about it when we come back. So, yep, this is Urudia Dunes version from Super Gear Quest by ModalModule. Enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Urudia Dunes version from Super Gear Quest by ModalModule. Yeah, definitely a very, very cool song. I don't know what it is. It has to me, it has a real kind of emotional weight about it. When it gets to the B section, just the melody and the chords just come together so perfectly, in my opinion. And it does have a it feels like a heavy emotion. I don't know how to describe it any more than that. But in particular, I love that the one bit in that melody, where it drops, it comes in on the first beat, it drops down, and then it quickly shoots up. I don't know if it's shooting up a seventh or something like that, and that I don't know. Just a cool little thing. I love that so much. I'd love to hear you describe how this kind of all fits in, how the three versions of this song fits into the game, and how you decide the different parts for each bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent stuff.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for your compliments, and yeah, that little drop to jump was just a specific thing that I heard in my head. And one of the things I love about sort of music technology is the kinds of things it allows you to do when it comes to ideas that may come. So that's a good example where there's a portamento slide downward and then it jumps up. So I remember, and this is, I'm getting nerded. I'm about to nerd out, and I actually am going to nerd out about the game too in a split second. So bear with me here. But when I was growing up, we had this keyboard, that worked. We could kind of fiddle around with it, and it had a pitch wheel, pitch bender, little wheel thing.
Yep.
But it would only go down a whole step or up a whole step. So that was just what we were used to, is just being able to do that amount of movement. And so, that lends itself to certain fun little synthy tricks. But to be able to slide down further than that is actually something that there's ways to do it through actual portamento patching and stuff like that. But long story short, it seems to be a little bit more difficult to do in a lot of whether it be keyboards or synthesizers within music programs, plugins, things like that. But the program that I use, quick shout out to Bitwig. This is what I use as my DAW. Bitwig Studio is really a very small, not very well known program, but it's sort of an offshoot to Ableton. And one of the things I love about that program is within their built-in synth engines, it allows for this way of manipulating pitch that's very loose. I mean, it doesn't really, there's no rules. You can literally bend a note as far as you want. I'm talking, 3 octaves worth of bending, and you can actually do that per note, on the piano roll. So it basically gives me a lot of freedom when it comes to those kinds of portamento slides. Whereas, again, if I wanted to hack a solution in a normal DAW, I'd probably be using a separate portamento patch to the normal patch, so that I could, let's say, jump 3 octaves by holding one note followed by the other note. I mean, obviously, again, this is all stuff that wouldn't make any sense to a non-musician or perhaps somebody who hasn't messed with this kind of stuff. But trust me when I say it's not the easiest thing to do in most situations, and so I'm happy to be able to do those kinds of things. It's just little stupid things like that make me really love this DAW. There are other things that are really basic that it can't do, and so I gotta say, you guys gotta pick up the slack on certain things. Just yesterday, I exported some piano MIDI that I was trying to actually have somebody test through other samples. And normally when you export MIDI, the sustain pedal MIDI data comes with it. Well, it didn't. And it turns out Bitwig doesn't export sustain pedal data with their MIDI. So why? I don't know. So this is kind of the trade-off, right? So anyway, obviously I digress quite a lot. All that to say, that's something that I was able to do using this program, and I'm happy to be able to do that. And so for you to call it out, kind of puts a smile on my face, just to think that, that was something that, I mean, I honestly may not have done if it wasn't for the convenience of being able to do it. And that's how it works with my brain. I hear something, a musical idea, and I try to put it down. And if I'm limited by what the software will or will not allow me to do, that sucks, especially if it kills the specific thing that I'm trying to accomplish. So very glad to be able to have accomplished that specific thing, and that it, affected you in that way is actually great.
Yeah.
Now, back to what I was about to say. Urudia is a large area that is basically separated into... Actually, yeah. It is 4 areas, because there's the original Urudia, and then there's the 3 separate sub areas, if you will, that you have to go to. And each one of them has a slightly different aesthetic, and each one of them has its own boss. So, the Dunes has this huge T-Rex looking thing. And then, the tower, for example, has this flying, dragon bat looking guy. And then the other one is a water enemy. So, again, the aesthetics sort of inspired the music, of course. I would go into that area. And this is, again, literally how I played this, or how I made the music for this game. Wherever possible, I would go to that area in the game, be in the game itself, playing the game, immersing myself in that world, and then essentially ask the question, what would sound good here? What should be here musically? I would just ask myself that question, or ask, I don't know, the air, the universe that question, and then the answer would come into my brain. That's really my favorite way of making music, to be completely honest with you. I can sit at a keyboard and I can make whatever. I can sit at a piano and play, jazz or classical or whatever. But if it comes from my mind first, to me, it has the greatest impact. It has the most significance. So when you mentioned the emotional depth of that B section, that's another thing that I notice I almost always end up at with most of my music, even when it's not really all that appropriate. I mean, we're talking about a level. We're not talking about like an emotional, story moment. We're just talking about running around shooting bad guys. You know what I mean? But there's there's just something that my brain does where it ends up in this emotional place, and I just try not to say no. I essentially just try to go along with whatever it is, follow through with it fully, and then if, let's say the developer isn't a big fan of the idea, or, I listen back to it at a later time and realize that it just doesn't fit, so be it. Then I start over and I do it again. But the main thing is to try to allow that creative process to flow as smoothly as possible. And anytime I say no, anytime I hesitate, anytime I second guess, that's when it comes to a full stop. The creativity it's like, turning the spigot off. You want to keep that spigot flowing as much as possible. At least that's how I feel. So basically, when you first enter Urudia, it's supposed to be another dimension, and it's also, sandy and ancient. And so when I first got there, the original track was what I felt, and then when I got into the subsequent areas, it was like, okay, how can I spin that track based on the aesthetics of this particular area? So the dunes obviously being even more sandy, and if I remember right, the color was sort of a red, sort of a instead of like brown sand, it was like red sand. So there was just a specific
it's like Central
vibe that
Australia.
Oh, perhaps. I wouldn't know, but I would love to see it.
Yeah, literally the dirt is red.
That's so cool.
A lot of areas in Central Australia. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, you're totally fine. I was going to say one quick, really nerdy thing, and again, that was in my mind prior to talking about pitch bending. So now we're talking nerdiness within the game. Well, also it's still musical nerdy. Let's face it. If you notice, this track is in 7. All the Urudia tracks are in 7. The prior area to Urudia is this sort of outdoor temple kind of area that you actually have to do this puzzle in order to activate the portal, quote unquote, that gets you into Urudia itself. So for that area, I actually was feeling a 5 meter. And the prior area to that, which is basically just this crystallized run and gun type area. You're just running through this area to get to the temple thing. Was a tune in 3. So literally it went from 3 to 5 to 7. And I think
we'll be playing that song.
You're right.
Soon.
Spoiler alert.
Crystal Steep, is that was
correct?
Yeah, spoiler alert. But no, it's good to hear these things so that when you hear the song, you can kind of connect it all together.
So Crystal Steppe is essentially 2 areas before Urudia itself, and Urudia Dunes is one of the 3 areas. You can pick which one you go to. It's essentially just 3 paths that you can choose once you're in Urudia itself. But anyway, the point is that 3, 5, 7 thing, the intention was to sort of convey this extension of oddity. 3 is not necessarily that odd, but it is something that's, slightly less usual than 4, right? And then 5, of course, is odd in both ways, both in the number and the feel, if you will. And then 7 is obviously furthering that odd, depending on how you look at it. But that was kind of my own brain's way of interpreting what I was doing. Because again, this all just happened. It just so happened, right? And then I looked back on it and I was like, that's kind of interesting. So I was half expecting expecting some of my musician buddies to like catch that and be like, oh, that's cool. Of course, I've never heard anybody mention it at all, so I'm mentioning it now as a little Easter egg for anybody just to have fun with. If they're ever playing through the game, they can now realize that was something that had happened.
Yeah, and I might even put the other versions on in the background in the post-production. So
good idea.
Yep.
So yeah,
that would be cool.
Yeah, that would be cool. Really quick, I just want to go back to the grass fields and just explain that the emotion, because you were talking about how it put a smile on your face, and you know, it's a fairly uplifting track. It's
a little bit heroic, maybe. Yeah,
heroic. There you go. Good word for it. You might notice that it's one of the only uplifting tracks. There's really only about one other one that comes to my mind right away. Besides, like, there's like a silly character theme. But the reason for that, I was saying before how this game is particularly dark, and a lot of it takes place underground. A lot of it takes place in literally dark environments, therefore lacking lighting. And Grassfields is the first time you actually get out into the open air. And so I wanted to, you know, have that feeling be enhanced in what ways I could. And so what came to my mind was this sort of more upbeat, you know, positive thing. It basically feels like, you know, you're finally in a place that you know, has a little bit of hope in it, you know?
Yeah, well, I think you've definitely nailed that. But why don't let's move on to your next selection that you've got for us.
Absolutely. And I apologize. I know we've been going on very, very long here. I'll try to make it somewhat concise. So yeah, my next track is one that I definitely played the game of when I was a kid. So this is definitely a little more accurate to chronology for me. It's Mega Man 5 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Which was composed by Mari Yamaguchi, and we're playing Crystal Man Stage. Now, I could have literally picked any track from this game. They're all great. I could have picked, honestly, just about any track from any NES Mega Man. I love all of the music. There is not a single game that I really don't like the music from. I know there are some people who really only like, you know, Mega Man 2, for example, that kind of thing. But for me, I love every single one. They're all slightly different, especially in the later games. They really tried to experiment a bit more, and I actually wanted to give a shout out to this game, this composer, because she was trying different things, and I really, really appreciated the results. So yeah, Crystal Man Stage was just the one that called to me at that particular moment, but it could have been any. You know, anybody who's never heard any of these game soundtracks or this particular game soundtrack, listen to it because it's fantastic. All right, Crystal Man Stage, here we go. Crystal Man by Mari Yamaguchi for Mega Man 5 on the NES. What a really cool song. A couple things I want to touch on. I consider it an intro A-B. So the intro section is kind of just this little interesting groove thing, and then really the melody comes in at the A, and it's just this soaring, long note melody, which I think really connects to me because I end up doing a lot of long note melodies. It's just this, sort of vocal way of approaching a melody as opposed to, let's say on an instrument that is more plucky is going to have a more active melody because you can't really hold a note anyway. So this is, the other approach is just like an instrument. Well, a violin's a good example too, where you can really elongate a note and give it vibrato and everything. So that's one thing I just wanted to call out, that I have a tendency to do that. And again, I really feel like my roots are here, as well as, again, that emotional tinge, that really melody driven approach, as opposed to like a bunch of little layers that are moving within each other. So there's just something about that I've always loved. And of course, it makes sense that would sort of reflect back into the music that I make. The other thing I wanted to say was the actual chord progression in that A section is something that I've always gravitated toward as well, which is, again, a little musical nerd moment, but a 1 minor to flat 6 major. There's something about that emotional shift that I've always loved. The minor itself being just that dark, sort of serious, potentially badass vibe, and then the flat 6 being, to me, like a hope. Like, you're taking something that had a serious nature to it, and you're giving it a hope. You're giving it an epicness. You're giving it this positive tinge. The lightness, the light at the end of the tunnel, or the light, inside the darkness, that kind of thing. That balance between those two, to me, has always been really, really important. And so I actually believe Kraid's Lair has that too during its A section. So kind of funny. I didn't intend to do that, but again, where you start to see the I guess general inspirations that I have. And then lastly, the B section is just super rad, just like changing all over the place. It's a really good contrast to the A, which is very, again, elongated. The B section is very active, and it has a lot of different changing chords, as well as actually I think maybe a key change and stuff like that. Just a lot of movement happening there. And then, of course, just loops right back to the intro. Also, just in this NES era, just how perfect the loops are, how simple the format is. You've got potentially 2-3 sections and that's it, and then you just loop right back, is something that I still tend to do to this day. I actually find myself again, when I'm hearing what I hear in my head, I'm finding myself hearing that loop back point so quickly, sometimes a minute and a half, and that's it. And there are times where the developer wants a longer loop. They don't want it to loop so fast. And of course, if, like, let's say it's a really long area of the game, you don't want it to be looping 10 times before, you change over. I try to gauge the length of the music that I make based on how many repetitions it'll happen, because I don't want it to sound repetitive in the game itself. So that's part of my thought process. But if it were up to me in a sort of natural setting, I'm probably going to make a minute and a half worth of music, which is probably going to be 2, 3, maybe 4 sections, and then it loops back. And that's just the way I do things. And I realize that really that's the way they did things back then. And, I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it for me,
Yeah, and before we move on, I think I'd just say a couple of things about chiptune music. That track in particular, like, for me, I am a person who does not like chiptune music, basically.
Oh, you don't like chiptune? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, basically. But what I have developed over, the last couple of years, basically, and a lot of props go to the Super Mikado Bros for their podcast.
Yes.
I've really learnt to appreciate, really how amazing some of these chiptunes really are. The limitations involved, and a track like that we just listened to, I listen to that, I don't necessarily hear old tech or anything like that. I just hear a song that is using all the little elements really well. Like the drums sound cool, the little noise, percussion, that kind of thing, and everything just comes together really nicely. Same with Kraid's Lair. I think that was a great chiptune track.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say I don't like chiptune. I naturally don't like chiptune. There's always exceptions. And I will say, I don't know if this sounds good or not, but I actually really love some of your chiptune music, which I'm not going to play. I was originally going to play some of it, but I really appreciate your kind of creative approach to. I think you mostly use Game Boy trackers. Is that correct?
Okay, so yeah. I'm sorry. I should just answer that simply. No, I don't just use Game Boy trackers, but I will say that I spent a lot of time on the Game Boy tracker called LSDJ. At a point in my life, enough to make an entire album's worth of music. I have a 35-track album that's all LSDJ, but I've definitely used others, be it NES Famitracker or Genesis Deflamask. I've done different stuff with different trackers for different purposes. But yeah, Game Boy's definitely, it's got a very specific sound, but frankly, it was really just the convenience. I actually had an emulator going on my phone, and I could just literally make music wherever I was because my phone was always with me. And so it was just one of those things where I just kept going and going and going with it. And yeah, just to touch on what you were saying, I could interpret what you're saying as basically that there wasn't anything about chiptune in the past that appealed to you, and perhaps it was because you just hadn't heard the specific tracks, and also to hear beyond the sound, because the reality is, and this is so funny, it was the Mercado Bros that brought that up to me. And also, by the way, quick shout out to them for essentially connecting us, because we were both fans of that podcast, and that's how we ended up getting to know each other. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So thanks bros for that. But yeah, what I was going to say was they brought up a really good point, which I never thought about, because I grew up with these sounds, and it just, for me, it was just normal. But for somebody who really isn't that used to the sounds, they can be really harsh, and especially for somebody like you, maybe who, and this is an assumption, you can tell me whether I'm right, but because you are a synthesist, you can create sounds with keyboards and analog synth gear, and you know how to manipulate tone. You know that if it's going to sound harsh, you're going to turn the filter, low pass filter down to smooth it out, that kind of thing. They didn't have that option, right? And so it was literally just the full harsh, pulse waveform or whatever, depending on the tracker or depending on the console, the chip. So if you can't hear past that harsh sound, you can't get into the, appreciation of the material. And this is a great example, this song, where you can separate it from the tones, right? You could imagine it with different instrumentation. You could imagine it being arranged, let's say, for a rock band, and it would actually work really well. And I think that's really kind of the biggest thing about somebody who isn't into chiptune on the surface level, is if they're able to hear past the sounds and into, really the material itself, then they'll probably appreciate the material. Now, that said, not all chiptune is created equal. Not all games had amazing music. There were those solo devs even back then, or ones that, the programmer was also given the task of making the music, and God help them, right? They were doing what they could based on their knowledge. But yeah, when you had somebody like Mary Yamaguchi, who is literally a composer hired by Capcom to make music, and in fact, a career composer at that, that was literally doing the 9-to-5 thing, she was on her A game. She was making incredible music for a lot of different games for a long, long time. To this day, she's still active. And yeah, now she doesn't have to deal with the limitations, so she can make music that has any type of sound palette she wants. She still goes back to chip, though, once in a while, because there's a nostalgic bent to it, because some people, like me, grew up with it, and so we automatically have a connection that's sort of visceral, right, to these sounds that for most people sound harsh and sound, nasty, happen to just hit us in the sweet spot. It brings us back to being 6 years old, playing our Nintendo.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I think it was chiptune was spoiled by when I was trying to get into game composing, and there was so many people doing horrible chiptune music.
Okay, sure. Well, and actually,
I don't have the nostalgia connected either.
Oh, you don't? Yeah. Like, what was your first system?
PlayStation.
Yeah, okay. See, yeah,
so it was
for sure.
I had DOS, and I listened to music through a PC speaker, which is probably about as harsh as it can get.
Oh no,
motherboard
absolutely.
Speaker.
Yeah, and of course, that world also didn't really have that many good composers in it, if I'm being honest. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. So really quick, I just wanted to mention. Nope, I lost my train of thought. Never mind. What were you gonna say?
No worries. I was gonna say, speaking of harsh sounds, I would love to move on to our next Super Gear quest, because this is a harsh but really, this is a rockin' song. This really this gets me going listening to this, and we'll just get it going and we'll come back and talk about it. This is Program Rage, again from Super Gear Quest by ModalModule. Enjoy, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Program Rage from Super Gear Quest by ModalModule. And Modal, I believe you were telling me while we were playing then that song originally was one of the developers. Started off as one of the developers' songs, so it's very interesting that out of all the tracks I brought that one in.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. I was saying that I was considering sort of letting you know. And by the way, if you go to the Bandcamp and you click on the individual tracks, there is individual crediting. So I gave him credit either as the inspiration, for a track or etc. For the tracks that he had any involvement in, unintentionally or otherwise. And so, yeah. That track was one of the sort of battle-oriented tracks that he had actually made, where when I listened to it, I was like, you know what? This is not bad. I could actually work with this, And so I took almost the entire structure as it was. Okay, so the drum beat, the tempo, the development where it sort of breaks down and builds back up. I took really all of that, and then what I did was, I think if I remember right, he actually gave me MIDI because he was using a completely different program. So I, of course, used my own instrumentation, and then I just manipulated that which I didn't really, think was that great or maybe thought could be improved or whatever. And then I just added a couple of little extra, fun things. So a lot of those sort of faster runs, especially the harmonies, were actually things that I had added. But yeah, credit is due. He actually made a really cool, interesting track, and I just used that as the foundation and built it up from there. And I didn't want to, remove any of the tracks that I thought were usable. I just wanted to see if I could, improve them, buff them up a little bit. And so that was a really good example. I'm actually really glad you picked that track because I think, based on what I had said before about his music not being great or whatever, that's an example of maybe the opposite. It was actually, it was pretty cool. But it was definitely very, very different than maybe what I would have done. There are some other tracks that are sort of, I guess I'll say more like metal, guitar centric that I did in the game. That would have been my approach to like a boss, whereas his was more like, almost like a dance track. Don't you think? Like the drum beat, it's got that.
It's definitely more rock rather than, than metal. But
Yeah.
it's quite simple. It's got a solid groove, and I love those melodies and those harmonies that come in. They're very, very sinister.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
how about you take us to your next pick?
All right.
This is something that I think I should know about, but I don't think I do, to be honest.
Well, no, this is a perfect example of what I was talking about trying to get, trying to pick tracks, pick games, pick composers that, I feel like haven't really been celebrated much, and honestly, were very impactful for me personally. So Ranger X, which was a Genesis game, was composed by Toshinobu, Hiraiwa, Noriyuki Iwadare. Was it just those two? Oh no, yeah. I think this track was just Yoshinobu Hiraiwa, if I remember correctly. But anyway, the point is that So we got this game as a present. I think it was maybe a Christmas present or something like that. And my brother, by the way, and I, a couple years apart, we both played a lot of games together. And so a lot of times, grandma or somebody would get him a game and me a game, and it was just like whatever. Like, it was so funny because when we first saw the cover of this game, we're like, what the heck is this? Like, it looked awesome. It's got a mech on the front, but he looks all sleek and stuff. Just look it up, Ranger X. Anybody Google image search and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's just a really cool looking game. And as soon as we popped it in, the very first thing that happens, the music just kicks right off, and it's just so good. Like, the music in this entire game is incredibly good. Everything from like, melodic rock type stuff to really unique, I don't even know what to call it, stuff that I really don't think I've ever heard anything like even today. So they were really trying something different, and I think they did a great job. And again, I have only heard, I could count on one hand the amount of people that I've heard even talk about this game or its soundtrack in my entire life, because it isn't a very well-known game. It was a very hard game, so maybe that's part of it. Like, it just wasn't, fun in the sun like Mario or something like that. But it was, again, the music just absolutely kicked ass. And so I just picked, again, just any given track that really spoke to me at the time when I was listening to it. But you could pick any track from this game or listen to the whole soundtrack, and there's going to be lots of really good stuff there. So what I picked was when I looked it up, was called Stage 4-2 Battleship Boss. I remember it was a boss. I don't remember exactly the details of the boss itself, but really great tracks. So here we go. Stage 4-2 Battleship Boss from Ranger X on the Genesis by Yoshinobu Hiraiwa.
All right.
Oh, God, I love that tune so much. Okay, so that was Ranger X for the Genesis. The track was Stage 4-2 Battleship Boss by Toshinobu Hiraiwa, my frickin' hero, man. Oh, my God. Where to begin? Crazy ARPs right off the bat.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Crazy ARPs, you could never even imagine trying to play that physically, although I would love to try, frankly. But then just like you were saying while we were playing, that bass line, it's just super heavy and just consistent, just driving. The only thing...
There's that one bit where the bass kind of just cuts out for a few bars and then boom, comes back in. It just hits.
Yeah.
It hits.
Heavy. Actually, it was a good follow-up track to Program Age because I feel like he sort of... incorporated that same idea of breaking down and building back up, and you when you create any sort of break in music, it's like it becomes like an exclamation point when you come back in. It's like, oh, there it is. So they both kind of did that. The one thing I feel like I would love to hear, and frankly I'll probably do a remix of this track one day, is more on the drum department. It's really just kind of a simple snare pattern, and I would love to hear like more of a full-blown drum beat to kind of go along with it. I don't know exactly what I would do, but just something heavy, because the bass line is so heavy and just everything going on. And again, by the way, long noted melody along with really dark, sort of emotional tones. So just again, kind of hammering that point of the things that I really gravitate toward. Now, I don't think all of my music necessarily is represented by those things, but it just... They're definitely things that I really love. And so I'm sure they end up in my music, at least often enough.
Yeah, I think with these two Genesis tracks you've picked, there a few little bits stood out to me, like that I noticed that similarities between your music and this music. But I think even the lack of drums, to me, that bass is almost a drum in itself. It's that crisp and heavy.
You're definitely right. Yeah, for sure. It's giving the energy that the drums could be giving, and that's like, for me, I'm a musician that's played in bands, and actually was a drummer before I even played keys, or at the same time I started composing, I was learning to play the drum set. But I do tend to think of things in a band-centric way. So I think, the drummer and the bassist, the rhythm section, right, are really important. And a lot of times they're locked into each other. So most of my music sort of represents that as well. And so that's where my mind goes. But you're right. If we were to look at this from the lens of, let's say, orchestral music, of course, the marching sort of snare pattern makes perfect sense. And then something else is creating that driving emotion that I would think in a band setting, the drums would be sort of the one doing, So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to our next Super Gear Quest track. And this, I think we're going to change the vibes a bit here. This is, one thing I really love about this, again, I believe this is the track that's in 3.
Yes.
And Crystal Steppe, is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah, Steppe, yeah.
Yeah, and I just love the kind of perpetual... I'm not sure the right words to describe this, but the perpetual kind of motion that the rhythm has, and the it all just comes together, just kind of flows on and on, not in a repetitive way, but every time it comes back to that first beat, it's like you're ready for it again, and the way the melody works, it's kind of in the background, it's not really too far at the front, but the way the melody works is, it sounds this is probably interesting, it sounds really easy to listen to, but when I am trying to imagine this song in my head and I'm trying to sing it back to myself, I actually really struggle. So but I love it. This is great. So I love everyone to hear this track. This is Crystal Steppe from Super Gear Quest by ModalModule. Enjoy. right, that was Crystal Step from Super Gear Quest by ModalModule. Fantastic song. I put the headphones on and just get lost in all those bell sounds, and yeah, the rhythm, the way everything all just comes together, the drum beat, I don't know, I love it. It's great. I'd love to hear you go into a little bit of detail about this track.
Well, I first of all, I'm really glad that you picked this one, and also I noticed that was your favorite when you did a little review on Bandcamp. Thank you for that.
It stood out the first time, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it was one that I was debating about. The long story short, that area that I was telling you, which is like there's basically just big crystals popping up everywhere, and the whole area has this sort of crystally vibe. I was prepared to create a track for it, and then I remembered that there was actually a track I made before I actually started pursuing composing for games, in earnest. I actually made a track based on... So, long story short, I was like, you know what? I want to make a track, and I want to be inspired by a specific type of area, etc. So I actually literally called this track originally Crystal Cave, and it was just, I envisioned what a crystal cave would look like in a game, and I made this track based on that inspiration. This was literally years before Super Gear Quest was even something I knew about, right? So I decided to use that track because, frankly, it was already there. It was ready to go. It was a really cool track. I really liked it when I made it, and it didn't serve a specific purpose. And so I brought that up with the developer, and I showed him the song, and he was like, well, yeah, I mean, I like it, so why not, kind of thing. So it's interesting because not only was this inspired not directly by this game, but just by a general concept, but it was also at a different point in my life creatively. And I was actually doing a lot more live looping and stuff like that back then. I was actually doing a lot of sort of performance using pad controllers and things like that. Very different than, sitting at a keyboard. I was really experimenting a lot, is what I'm trying to say. And it was more about, can I reproduce this in a live setting? I was actually initially envisioning performing these things live and live looping each part as I develop them, and etc. So that's why there's a lot of repeated loops within the music for this particular track. So, the fact that appealed to you is actually really fascinating for me because it's not an approach that I typically take these days. So in a way, it's sort of like testament to that it might be good to implement those kinds of things in more and maybe be less afraid, I don't know if afraid is the right word, but less hesitant to repeat things so many times, because I agree, there's a lot of music that I enjoy too that has this repetitive nature. What it does is it creates this sort of mantra feeling, right? It's like this meditation, right, of this thing that's just flowing over you. Watching the ocean, the wave comes in, it goes out, it comes in, it goes out. There's a specific feeling that comes from that redundance, repetition. Anyway, all that to say, I really liked this track way back. I really liked it when I was considering what to put in the game. I decided to put it in the game, and I mean, not only am I glad to put it in the game because it finally served a purpose, but doubly so that, somebody like you actually was able to vibe on it as you did. So that's awesome.
Yeah, no, I loved it. So that's probably that could be the oldest song that we're playing on this podcast, I imagine.
As far as the songs I've written, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. All right, well, why don't you introduce us to your next pick?
Awesome. Okay, so this is another, maybe deep cut. It's maybe slightly more popular than Ranger X. This game is called Rocket Knight Adventures. I always forget if it's plural or singular. I had to look. And it is, like I said, Genesis. This particular track apparently is being credited to Aki Hata, who I discovered afterward is kind of like a pop singer. Of course, this could be a different Aki Hata, but that's what it seemed like they were connecting the dots to. Pop, Star or whatever in Japan. And this track, I mean, again, another example where the entire game has amazing music. This game is like an all-star cast of composers, by the way. I don't have the list in front of me, but you just gotta trust me. It's Konami, and it's just lots of really amazing Konami composers that jumped in on this game. And so you've got a lot of variety of different kinds of tracks, and some of them are super, super, super good. Be it like orchestral, by the way, Genesis orchestral, but good Genesis orchestral is very hard to find. So that's cool. And then you've got like super, fusiony, funky stuff that's just incredible with like virtuosic keyboard solos and stuff. Of course, it's probably programmed, but the point is that it's programmed such that it feels like somebody's playing, and it's really, really good.
Yeah.
This track is a little more on the electronic bent because, of course, this is a synth podcast, so that was part of the reason I chose this particular track. But also, it's just got a really, really good vibe, and just a little backstory to the area. Sorry, I didn't actually name the track yet. So Deep Space was one title that I saw. It's the 6th stage of the game, so stage 6 is kind of, maybe a more generic title. But it literally is taking place in space. Most of the game, you're walking around, in like, whatever, a forest or in a castle or things like that. But this is like later on in the game, you literally get blown out of a cannon into space, and you're literally flying around space. Rocket Knight is like this opossum, I think, and he's got like a knight armor on, and he's just in this level, he's got his rocket boosters going, so he's just flying through space with his little goggles on and his sword, facing forward. So yeah, starting off at the description of the character. So Rocket Knight is actually the main character. He's like an opossum, and he's got a knight outfit on. And so when he's in space, he's literally got his rocket boosters going, and he's got his sword pointed forward. He's got these little goggles on. So it's just this really cool look. And you're out in space, and there's a bunch of like crazy robots and stuff out to get you. And yeah, this track is just so perfect for the level. It just fits so well. In fact, the snarly, harsh sound of the Genesis works perfectly with the sound effects and the, because there's a lot of metallic stuff happening. Your metal sword clashing against metal enemies. So it's really just this vibe that altogether is just great. So anyway, without further ado, Stage 6, Deep Space, from Rocket Knight Adventures by Hata for the Genesis. Here we go.
All right. That was excellent. So many cool bits in that song.
Oh my God. All right. So, God, so good. We're back. Stage 6, Deep Space, Hata, Rocket Knight Adventure, Genesis. Oh man, so cool. Just so many things about it, and there's so many different parts, and each part has its own, cool features. The very beginning, just super heavy, I don't know, bass line, I guess you could say, but then that funny synth brass comes in. And then then it's like almost just kind of a techno groove, and it's just, it's just doing its thing, just going along. And then before you know it, these crazy arps come in, and this beautiful long, chord section that just, oh man, it's just great. I don't really have to say more. I'm sure it speaks for itself. It's a fantastic track.
I'm definitely going to go back and check out these soundtracks that I haven't listened to, because that was amazing. And I think I say this too much, but that gave me some Yellow Magic Orchestra vibes. It really had some of those sections anyway. Had a real 70s kind of techno pop sound to it.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense because, like I said, I believe she's a pop, artist and obviously makes her own music, and I'm sure there's that inspiration. Also, quick shout out to Marcato Bros again, because I didn't even know who IMO was before them. They mentioned them kind of in passing, like when relating to a different, video game track or whatever. And that's the thing, is that, the roots, right? So a lot of these games, a lot of these composers have their roots in earlier music as well, be it, J Fusion or, rock or metal or prog, and those are my roots too. If I really go back, those are the kinds of things that I really gravitated toward outside of video games. But what's funny is it kind of goes both ways, because there were certain things, certain genres, let's say, that I had heard first in a video game and then later heard sort of the origins of that genre and went, oh, that's what they were inspired by to make this music. So I gotta say, that's actually a really important thing to me, is understanding that, everything is inspired by everything else, and no matter what, there's going to be a root that you can find that's further back. And of course, we're going all the way back to classical music and whatever, Gregorian chants or whatever. You could just keep going. But a lot of people who kind of hate on something for sounding like something else don't understand that that's just how it works. And really, that young person who hears that. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. Undertale, right? Yep. Young person who played Undertale and go, oh man, this music is so great, but doesn't realize that it's really connected and very inspired by earlier music. It doesn't matter. They're hearing something that they enjoy. They're hearing something that inspires them. And frankly, the person that made that music has a smile on their face knowing that they're paying homage to those past composers as well.
Sure. Yep.
You know what I mean? It's like we're all just paying forward this amazing thing, this beautiful, magical, amazing thing called music. We're all just passing it along, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I think I used to obsess over trying to come up with stuff that's unique and sometimes just plain weird. But to be able to just kind of let go of that and just write some music and not worry about it sounding like something else. Often that freedom sends you somewhere else anyway, and you end up creating this kind of hybrid of starting off someplace that's kind of familiar and ending up with something new. And I think some of my best songs I've started with, all right, I'm going to kind of take inspiration from this track and just see what I can do with it.
Quick tag onto that. First of all, I had a similar path, and I think most of us do, especially when we're young. Maybe it's an age thing, maybe it's an experience thing. But when I was starting out, I actually started making music at like 9 years old, but I had melodies in my head since I was a kid. But the point is that when I was first starting out, I would supersede what I heard in my head to just do some crazy thing, because I just wanted it to be different, and I wanted it to be impressive, and I wanted it to, turn heads or whatever. Of course, nobody ever heard that stuff anyway, so what does it matter? But it's just that energy that people tend to put into things where they're really trying, kind of thing. And I'm at this stage now where it's the opposite. I don't try, I just let it flow. And I believe that that's, my best way of making music. There's no wrong way to make music, and however anybody does it is great for them. And, as you develop, you might alter that, and that's okay too. But what I was going to say really quickly was, this was Dave Posey was my improv, what was it called? Advanced improv instructor. I went to music college. That's actually the only music education I've gotten. And he explained basically transcribing people's solos, but I feel this is a more general concept, is when you transcribe somebody's solo and understand what it was that they were doing, what decisions they were making at that moment, you're putting that into your brain, and it's like this big pot of stew, and you're literally just stirring this stew with all these different ingredients of all these different solos, all these different musical ideas from different people. Even if it's just that you're listening to the music, I think it still goes in the pot, and you just stir it, and then years later, maybe months, maybe days, but most of the time years later, you pull out a scoop of that stew, and what it is an amalgamation of all of these different inspirations. And it's not a direct, I'm gonna copy this person's thing. It just so happens that this little teeny nugget came from this one solo, from this one artist, from this one record kind of thing,
that's great.
And you know, that when he explained that was a huge light bulb moment for me, because it's something that I felt like naturally happened, but I never had, you know, the way of really describing it. And that's literally music in my mind. Again, going back to this idea of the roots. You know, yeah, you could literally say that I'm trying to make something that sounds like this other, you know, composer or other track, but I'm saying most of the time, in general, if it happens, it's by accident, and it's only this small fragment, and all these fragments are combining to form this unique thing. No matter what, it's going to have your energy in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, you don't even have to worry, just go for it, you know?
Yeah, well, on that note, I want to move to this next track, and this is a very interesting next track. This is going to be the last of our Super Gear Quest tracks that we play on this episode, at least for now. This, to me, I think something I appreciate about you is, this is just from the outside looking in. I don't really know if this is how you go about things, but you don't seem afraid to just run with an idea and just take it all the way to the end. And I think this next track, for me, I hope this doesn't come across as offensive, but this next track is a really silly song. And it is just, to me, I mean that in the best way. It sounds like you've just gone with this idea and you've just pushed it to the max. And there's nothing I hate more than people who, you know, they hold everything back. Everything has to be by the books. And I don't know. Mm-hmm. I love this next song. We'll let the listeners decide what they think for themselves. But this is an excellent track. Silly, funny, intense. I don't even know. Well, let's let the music speak for itself. This is Ancient Weapon 1 from Super Gear Quest by ModalModule. Wow. What an intense song. I absolutely love that. There's just kind of no holding back. It's just all the way to the top. And my goodness, from the insane drums to the orchestra hits. And the bit that got me, when I listened to that song, the bit that really got me was those ascending bits. I'll do my best to to make that's just so good.
Which your version, by the way, sounds like a car, like a manual stick shift that's shifting gears, and I could totally hear how that sort of energy is in the track as well.
It is just shifting up the intensity every one of those accents. Excellent stuff. I love it.
Thank you.
So how does this fit into the game? I'd love to know. Ancient Weapon. To me, listening to this song, and I know I'm pretty sure there's an even more intense version later on in the soundtrack, but this sounds like the ultimate boss to me.
Right. So without going into too much detail, Ancient Weapon is a specific boss that comes around multiple times in the game, and it is technically considered something powerful enough to end the entire world, and the main bad guy is trying to harness its power for that purpose. He's just this maniacal, evil dude. He's just like, oh, I'm just going to destroy everything. I'll employ this ancient weapon to do that. And so the first time you fight it, it actually isn't fully, it's an ancient weapon. It's old. And so it was like broken down. And so it wasn't fully repaired by the time you first fight it. So as each subsequent version happens, and you're fighting it, it's obviously, it gets more powerful, and therefore the music ramps up. The entire idea behind this track was literally just chaos, because the boss fight itself is chaos. This game's actually really, really darn hard. Like I struggled to beat it, and but it's kind of one of those things where as a composer of video games music, but also a lover of video games, that's like I want to beat every game that I compose for, so it was like I really took it upon myself. But it's a hard game, and this boss is such a freaking bitch. He's just really, really he splits into different parts, and each of those parts shoots different things at you. And each of those bullets does, one is homing and one is straight, and then there's a big laser, and then there's missiles. Like, there's just so many different things happening. To try to dodge everything is just, you're gonna end up getting hit a lot. So that was the energy of the boss, and so of course my way of trying to replicate that energy with the music was, okay, just go crazy, go ham. And, again, this was what was in my head in the first place, was this really strange arpeggio that goes back and forth, and then, of course, the drums that go along with it and all that kind of stuff. I should clarify, too, I said I played drum set since I was 9 years old, actually, is the specific time. I was really into rock and then later metal, and I actually have played in metal bands. So this, at least the drum portion of this really represents me as a drummer. I could be playing these parts. I actually did sequence all the tracks on all the drums on this game, but I have actually performed drums for certain tracks for certain games. So, that's always an option, but basically for ease and speed and whatever, a lot of times I'll just sequence, but I sequence based on how I would play it out. And so, yeah, sometimes it's beyond my capabilities. This track is, I think, an example that I would probably be able to play, but it's definitely got the energy of what I would bring to the table if I was to play it on drums, which brings up a really fun concept of like playing this stuff live someday. You know what I mean? Like maybe if I could hire out some other musicians and actually just shred this on drums, why not? Kind of thing. But anyway, I digress. That was the reason that it is so bombastic and over the top and ridiculous, was literally the boss himself is absolutely insane. If you ever try to play it, you're going to get pissed off. You're going to swear. You're going to want to throw the controller. That's just how it is. And so, a lot of times I try to kind of compensate for those moments to make music that's maybe pleasant and sort of motivating. But this time I was like, nah, I'm just going to go for something absolutely ridiculous to go along with it. So silly was your word for it. I definitely think that
ridiculous is a better word, I think. Yep.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's synonymous as far as that interpretation, that definition of silly. Absolutely. But it's not like cheesy, campy, happy-go-lucky, which of course is I could think of at least one track that's like that in this game as well, which was a character theme. So anyway, yeah, all that to say, yes, ridiculous track. I actually think it's funny that you picked that among the options, but I guess just for the energy change, because it was very different from the other ones.
No, I had to put that in, for sure.
Very good. Fair enough.
What do you got for us next?
All right, so we're actually still continuing chronologically, but again, a little bit different as far as me. When I said I played a lot of Mega Man games when I was a kid, I was talking about the NES games, but also the Super Nintendo games. So this is from the Super Nintendo Mega Man, and it's actually Mega Man X2, which again, a little bit of a digression because Mega Man X is the most popular of the three that were on Super Nintendo. In the X series. I'm not going to go into details. The point is, X2 is maybe a little bit less popular, but in my opinion, it's actually my favorite, mainly for the sound, the quality of the sounds. So Yuki Iwai was the sole composer for this game, whereas Mega Man X actually had a number of composers. And I think, Mega Man X was earlier in the SNES, so maybe they didn't have as good a handle of the sampling, because it's very hard, apparently, it's very hard to create good samples for the SNES. But by X2, it seemed like they really had a good handle because it just sounded so good. And so that was one of the reasons. The other reason was I really liked this composer's approach to the music. The level I chose, or the music for the level I chose, was Crystal Snail's Stage. And yeah, Mega Man X2 SNES. Let's do it. Yeah, so that was Crystal Snail's Stage by Yuki Iwai for Mega Man X2 on the SNES. Really kind of interesting track. Again, it was the one that called to me when I was going through this soundtrack to pick a song. I could have literally picked any of them because, again, I really like this entire soundtrack. But it is a really interesting one in a more sort of prog sense. There's a lot of meter changes. There's a lot of really interesting, just kind of emotional shifts and things like that. It's kind of like the Ranger X track. It's kind of hard to put your finger on exactly what it is, but it's just very, very unique.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And I think that these composers should be celebrated because, they aren't the most popular. Yuki Iwai, I don't know that she's done many other things. But yeah, I don't think I've heard much else from her, but I just love this soundtrack so much.
Yeah, no, that was great. Speaking of great music, I would love to move on to this next track. This could be one of my favorite tracks of this episode. I think we're still awesome. We're going to move on to a different game now. So this is a work in progress game, Kill the Dragon, and this has been going for a number of years. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is still in development. There was a bit of a break. Again, this is a solo dev. Oh, no, you know what? I think he hires out for some of the art, but for the most part, he's doing it by himself. He goes by Picky Source. And yeah, he kind of took a break here and there, and there was a point where I thought, oh no, like, is this game, gonna stop development? I'm sure you've dealt with that too, where it's like they just kind of disappear, or the game just they decide to quit, kind of thing, and it's depressing when that happens. But no, he's still working on it. He's just kind of, it's a piecemeal sort of deal. So it's been a while, and it's still gonna be a little bit longer. But it's a top-down. I think they call it like a roguelite, where you die and you start over, and you have like powers that you can utilize, but just for that run through the game. It's the idea of like running through a game a bunch of different times, and you're gonna die a lot because it's a very hard game, and also it's procedurally generated in some senses. So it's definitely the kind of game where the music is gonna be heard a lot, and therefore, again, you don't want it to be super repetitive or anything like that. And there's kind of an interesting backstory with the, how I ended up getting this gig that I actually really want to tell, but I'll wait till after we play it.
Yeah, cool. I love this song, and I can speak about a number of things, but I just encourage the listeners to listen out for the, I guess you call it the arpeggios going, and as I listen to it, although the drum beat might stay the same, the arpeggios are hitting on different accents, or they're different lengths, and it just creates this different sense of rhythm every time it changes. And the arpeggios just seem to change quite a number of times. And I don't know, it's quite hard for me to explain this kind of stuff. But my goodness, this is a phenomenal track. And the chorus, the A, B, C, and D sections, they just seem to go up and up and up, and the intensity just keeps going. And yeah, this is fantastic. This is really, really good, and I would love everyone to hear this. So this is Dead Forest from Kill the Dragon by ModalModule. Enjoy.